Internally, I was so dead, I didn't feel. I was less and less connected to myself as a person, to my relationship with God. Steadily throughout 2014, I continued to devolve into places of deeper sadness. I couldn't hide it anymore. I wasn't sure about anything except that I loved my children.
I was in shock about it at first because how did I miss all this living with you every day?
As pastors, we are expected to not make the same mistakes as normal people do. In a lot of ways, it feels to me like these expectations rob us of our ability to be human. If this is who God is, that his compassion, his grace is based on my performance or my accomplishments, that God can't help me right now. And I ended up on the floor in my house, just sobbing uncontrollably. So I drove myself to the emergency room at Kaiser.
So I said, okay, I'm gonna leave my work right now and I'll meet you there. It was a heartbreaking moment.
And in that moment, I felt the oddest thing, which was peace. I was completely at the mercy of whatever would come next.
My job all along, I felt like, was just to be there for him, whatever it was that he needed. I spent my lunch hours at work often screaming to God about why he was letting this happen.
Slowly but surely, I improved. I was going to therapy, I was taking medication. There was no praise Jesus, I'm not depressed anymore moment. Instead, this accepting myself for who I am as this fallible person, and that God knows this about me, all of a sudden changed the landscape of what I understood a relationship with him to be. I found one day that I realized I had something I wanted to say. And I approached the leadership and said, hey, I think I'm ready. I want to introduce this conversation, this idea that failing or making mistakes or accepting the fallibility of who you are isn't a loss, it's a win. God isn't going to fix everything for us, that we're more partners in life, and the path that one person takes to healing may look very different from the path that someone else takes. So I started writing a series. I just said everything, unashamed and unafraid.
And I was in full support of it. I think it's very important that it's talked about.
And someone got up at the end to pray and close the service and said, isn't it great that God fixes things for us? And I was furious. In one moment, this person who was uncomfortable tried to undo it in one catchphrase. But after another sermon, as soon as the service was over, there was a line of people up the wall. And I had conversation after conversation of people saying, my husband has felt this way and I've just never understood. My wife has felt this way and I never understood. You know, my daughter has struggled. The point is for them to know that I'm a normal person who is doing my best to follow God just like they are.
So Brice and I were part of a thriving in ministry cohort. Each of the people within that cohort was dedicated to authenticity of self and willing to be honest. This only works if we are healthily authentic with each other.
And that was a group of pastors where I could be open with them. There's a lot of trust, there's a lot of love, there's a lot of care.
And you need a space where you can have your own feelings, your own emotions, your own struggles.
When I struggled so deeply with my depression and anxiety, I realized that my view of who God wasn't big enough for what I was actually feeling.
You know, Brice doesn't approach these conversations or these presentations as the expert on the matter or the one who has finished the race, and so now I'm going to tell you my 5 quick tips for dealing with depression. And so it allows him to also have community, and it gives him space for personal reflection.
This image of this perfect pastor who doesn't make mistakes is really a false idol. But the community won't learn to be open and vulnerable if we're not willing to be open and vulnerable.